Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, I want to talk about the conversations that have always persisted within the Black community around education. Now, I do have a few YouTube videos that you guys can go and check out. They were made actually like a year ago. Officially, I've had this YouTube channel for like a year where I've been consistently creating content as a wannabe PhD student, you know what I mean? Indulging in my independent study, sharing my thoughts and my ideas. And it's great. I'm so grateful for you guys. I'm happy that we're kind of building a little bit of a community over here, and I really appreciate the support. One little disclaimer I do want to give as we are welcoming new subscribers to the channel is that, I read books, right? I don't know everything. As someone who could be considered a modern day thought leader, sometimes we have takes and we engage with ideas and we are so far off, right? We are not on the mark. We are missing it. There's books that I've read and I haven't read thoroughly enough, right? Or I haven't studied thoroughly enough. I don't finish every book that I read, like very much imperfect, but very much engaged in a hobby and something that is passionate to me, which is teaching, which is writing, which is reading. And so I just want to give that disclaimer because I think a lot of times people come to this channel and they may be looking to a debate or they may be looking to, and there's nothing wrong with correction. There's nothing wrong with any of those things, right? But I just want people to know that this is a hobby for me, right? I really enjoy it. I don't want to diminish the possibilities, right, of what it could be and where we could go. But I recognize that it is a slow and steady climb, right? The growth is consistent. I'm constantly showing up. But it is not one of those things that's kind of been an overnight thing for me, right? I started writing back in 2018. So, this has been a bit of a journey. And so I appreciate anyone who appreciates my work. But I do want people to know that I'm not here to sell you anything, like I'm doing me, welcome to the space. And if you enjoy it, great, right? So that's just a little disclaimer. Now, first things first, right, regarding this, and what I want to say is every Black person that pushes for a trade school or pushes for African Americans to essentially remain in the labor field, right, and menial labor jobs, is someone who has not gone to college and has not acquired a 4-year degree. Conversations around debt are really rooted in things like, first and foremost, I want to say this, and I don't want to be like, because the fight is for equality. The fight is for African Americans to have equal opportunities and equal access to resources to go about acquiring a college degree, which for a lot of people, it's not really up for debate. If you are in within American society, that is your way to upward mobility. People who like to share stories about why it didn't work out for them, please understand that everyone has nuance and there's a lot that people don't share when we come online and we share our negative experiences, right? Like it's kind of like relational advice. I don't really recommend anybody taking relational advice from anyone, right? Because most people are online venting out of frustration. And the reality is that if the love of their life came today and it worked out, they would be as happy and, pro love, right? So let's just not really get too far into that, right? And it's the same thing when it comes to college, but people just have to understand that people have stories that they don't share. People don't really talk about the choices that they made and why it worked that way and why, they don't share those things. And you also have to understand the complexity and again, the nuance of going to college right after high school and being this young adult who has no idea what you're doing, right? College is such a huge investment. And if you don't have the tools to invest, right, within the institution, you're going to come up short, right? You're going to come up short drastically. I think about my own experience, right? That's why I came up short, right? And it's just different for everyone. I personally, if it's up to me, I think people should have a little bit of a gap year after high school, and I think you should go afterwards. But I think even in that, depending on where you live, most Black people are in urban communities. There's a lack of resources. I think there's a higher possibility for you to kind of get caught up with the wrong people, and not necessarily in regards to criminality, but just in regards to going down a path that's a little less favorable, right? That has a lot less options. And that's just the reality, right? That's the price of being in certain environments. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where not everybody can really make it out of that environment, especially if you don't have proper mentorship. So right now, the conversations around, should Black people go to, should we send our kids to institutions and, private schools with predominantly white students and things like that. There's conversations from some of the Black thought leaders I follow on TikTok who were just kind of talking about why this is, pointless, and how we're subjecting our children to racism, and setting them up to have lifelong implications of like self-hate and so forth. And though I do not want to dismiss those experiences from those kids who have gone to private school, I don't necessarily think you have to go to private school per se, like a predominantly white school, in order to have, a quality education, in order to have great opportunities. But I will acknowledge that I'm not in that tax bracket, so I can't really have that conversation. I more so just want to focus on the conversations around college and how what we're doing, and what has always really been consistent within the Black community, is this sort of like shaming African Americans for learning for the sake of learning, shaming one another for prioritizing education and pursuing the latter path. Now, I was reading The Black Bourgeoisie. This is actually a book I did not end up getting through, and I may get these names mixed up, but I know that it was either Woodrow Wilson. I know it was Woodrow Wilson, and it was W. Du Bois. And I believe Du Bois was more so pushing for trade work, but Woodrow Wilson was pushing for education, right? College degrees. And at this time, African Americans were kind of just following the path of trades. But the downside, or rather the consequence of that, was that as we were pursuing the trades, right, and we were in the labor market rather, we were no longer using our minds, right? We were no longer using our minds. We were no longer, and like I said, I could get those names mixed up. So, like I said, I don't always get it right, but we were essentially no longer using our minds. So it was one of those things to where, and honestly, you can just see that today, right? Like you can kind of see how for a lot of African Americans, the mind is off, right? If it's not labor in which we're using our hands, it's something that is highly discouraged. We don't actually believe that we can make money with our minds. And perhaps this could kind of be some of the criticism around content creation and thinking smarter and so forth, right? It sounds like a cliche, and it sounds like a, relatively easy thing to do. But when you really look at where we are and where we're dominating, in career fields, it is typically in trade schools. And you talk about affordability, back to what I was saying about college debt. Well, here's the thing, right? I knew that I could apply for scholarships. I could literally put in the work and get scholarships. But guess what? I wasn't willing to put in the work. I wasn't willing to send, 2,000 words here, 3,500 words there, character count, this and that. I wasn't willing to put in that work to ensure that my education was paid for. So guess what? I was going to be rolling with the loans. And that's just the harsh reality. Now, it's not to say that, no, honestly, that's pretty much what I'm saying. I'm saying that college can be affordable, right? We talk about it like it's just this thing to where it's like you have no choice but to go into college and acquire all this debt. And it's just not true. You actually do have the opportunity to apply for scholarships, because there are people who donate to nonprofits and to grants and things like that. And they do have the money and the resources available. The problem is, are you willing to put in the work? And at what point in time do you start putting in that work, right? Me personally being a little bit older, that looks a lot different, right? And so, yes, in part, that is kind of, the unfortunate thing about being in communities with like public schooling and there's not a lot of resources. You don't have guidance counselors who are, helping you get through some of those scholarships at such an early age, before you enter college or whatever. But the truth is that the resources are there. The thing is, are you willing to put in the work to actually go about ensuring that you can have, free tuition? Now, again, like I said, this is not like, I don't want to say this as a matter of factly, and I don't want this to be like an end all be all. But that is true. It actually can be affordable. And I think the reason why we have to be a little bit more positive when we start talking about education is because as we are entering into a information technological age, right? Meaning everything is centered digitally. Meta is getting rid of their fact checking databases. Like we're at a point in time now where so many African Americans are online. Okay, period. We're online. Facebook is probably, I would say I don't know the demographic, but Facebook is up there, right? And there's a lot of elders on Facebook, and Facebook has a very interesting way of pumping a lot of like ads and fake news sites, and it's just incredibly toxic. Now, it's no different than TikTok, right? I mean, not TikTok, I'm sorry, Instagram. We see this with the Shade Room and so forth. And so that's a problem, right? That's a problem when people are seeing articles and they're seeing news sites and things like that don't actually exist. And they're believing websites like, news blogger or news blogger or something crazy.com, and it's got this wild headline and it's rage bait and it's all of this, and it's so emotionally driven. And so I just think it's important for people to actually start to realize that, no, we really were living in an age where if you do want to find yourself in a space and you want to, acquire skills of intelligence, you want to sharpen your mind, that's what you should do, right? The byproduct of just going to trade school is that's all it will be, right? It's this thing to where, depending on the trade, but since we are typically always pushing for plumbers and things like that, it's hard on the body. And that's no different than slavery. That's no different than what we've been doing. You know what I mean? We have to understand that positively, you can actually make an impact in the world. You can have fulfillment within your work, and you can use your mind to go about acquiring it, right? You don't necessarily, and to go about sustaining it. You don't actually have to be in a field or in an industry and you're constantly using your body and you know what I mean? Now, some of this is definitely rooted in patriarchy, but I think a lot of it is just rooted in limited thinking. Like, you tell people, hey, you guys should stop engaging in this type of juvenile behavior, and the alternative will go get a trade. For some people, that's not fulfilling. That's not the lifestyle they want to live. And when you tell people this is the only way, then that's what happens. I think it's important for African Americans today, especially, and I keep using the word Black and African American interchangeably, because I just feel like we're in a time today where everything is so politically charged. I don't even know where we are. I don't even know where we are anymore, right? So that's why I keep saying that. But I think it's just so important for people to really educate the youth about a lot of different career fields, right? We're constantly pushing this narrative that we need representation, but at the same time, we are not doing any of the work, or even from an advocacy standpoint, we are not encouraging young adults to go into these spaces where there is a lack of representation. And it is 100% possible. And so back to my whole thing about the concerns with debt. Well, I've gotten older, right? I've gotten older, and you realize that financial literacy is a thing, and you realize that you actually don't have to die with debt if that's something that's incredibly important to you. For some people, they're like, hey, I'm gonna make these payments. I'm gonna be at peace with this, right? I'm gonna pay this minimum or whatever this basis is, this payment is, and I'm gonna be okay with that. For some people, they're like, I don't want to, but what I don't really understand about this conversation and this kind of like fear mongering when you start talking about college investment, which we know is, I would say, is a good return on your investment, if you ask me. What really concerns me is, like, you're in debt now, right? Being impoverished, you're in debt because you're in debt to someone. You're in debt to the payday loan company. You're in debt to, you know what I mean? Like, you're in debt to your uncle, your aunt. You're in debt to someone, because you can't afford to live your life, and that's the biggest grievance for me when I look at the lives of so many African Americans, not even just the people around me, but just, in general. It's not, I'm not saying that there aren't real issues and there aren't real, things. I don't want to say things, but like, there's a lot of things we're advocating for as we are entering into, certain spaces and things like that. But I don't know. I just think what I'm really trying to say, just simply put, is that hardship and struggle and all of it doesn't have to be everybody's lot, right? It doesn't have to be everybody's lot in life. So much of this whole anti-education rhetoric and anti-corporate, or whatever the case you want to call it, so much of that is rooted in the feeling of not being good enough. Feeling like you can't assimilate into this culture. And I don't even want to say assimilate, because that was actually a pretty bad word to use. Because I think what people need to understand, and what Black people need to understand, is that you are just as much as American as anybody else. You know what I mean? This is your culture as well. For every movement, every company, everything that white people have done, Black people have done as well, right? the white homemakers and all the black women were that as well. It wasn't as widespread. Okay, most of us were nannies back then, but there have been some black women who were put up, right, and who were housewives and things like that, and even to this day, right, stay-at-home moms, if that's your thing. So sometimes within American society, because they work so hard to brainwash us, just simply put, and I don't want to go on a bench of conspiracy, but let me just say that American society has done a very good job at hiding our history, right? And so you have to look very carefully, but when you look close enough, you're going to find that for every innovation, for every, imagery of women and men or whatever, black people were there as well, right? And we were doing the same thing. It might have looked a little differently, but we were there and we were advancing as well. And so I think we have to understand that we didn't just come here and we were just in change and that's the end of it. And I think that's kind of where some of the conversation, comes from, because the history is lost on us, right? Like I said, it's hidden. It's something you have to really thoroughly explore through independent study. I love seeing so many Gen Zers, going to school and studying African studies, because it's a real thing. You really have to work hard to kind of find the truth of our being. But it's important that we recognize that, because when you don't, I just think you're going to find yourself relegating yourself to old stereotypes, and all of this stuff just doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve us. So that's the truth. The truth is that, this is tough. Like I said, I feel like I'm trying to find the right words, and I'm just wanting to create this to kind of talk to you guys. But I know it looks differently for everybody. I know everyone is feeling like you have to stay true to something. And can I just say this too? I think when you first start studying African American history, you find yourself in that space where you're very radical, and you can call it rage, you can call it, and it's very much, it's warranted. I would say that it's warranted. It's valid. It's, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's important for you to know that you don't stay there, you can progress. And, I don't want to say staying down, but for a lack of better words, staying down or finding yourself in a situation where you're refusing to advance, where you're refusing to better yourself, that is not advocacy, right? That is not, that's not helping the community, in any way, shape, or form. And so I think we have to get back to, the prayers, the promises, and the hopes of the generations before us, right? Those coming out of the civil rights era, 1960s, what were they hoping for, right? They were wanting that office suite. They were wanting to be that anesthesiologist. They were wanting to be an art curator. They were wanting to be a writer. They were wanting to go into tech, whatever the case may be, STEM, right? They were wanting to be that pediatrician. I think we have to kind of realize what we were advocating for. And I think sometimes that gets lost on us with all the rage bait and the emotions that come from recognizing this history and this new, we have this database and there's this new information coming out and there's stories that are still ongoing and there's inequality that is persisting. I think we have to recognize that at the end of the day, this is what they were fighting for. It wasn't for us to just stay where we are and feel like we have to be there has to be some type of allegiance to these long-held stereotypes about our blackness. Now, one thing I will say, because I know everything is, like I said, it's very politically charged. I won't ignore conversations around colorism. I don't want to say conversations, but I won't ignore the nuances around colorism and phenotypes, hair types, all those different things that play a huge role into discriminatory factors that make it harder for some people to, I want to say maybe be more upwardly mobile, but I think discrimination is all across the board for Black people. I think that's probably one of the lies. I think when you start talking about racism is like it puts us against each other to make us think that someone's being treated better. But I think all across the board, I think we're all essentially treated the same. And I think we all kind of have similar experiences that are pretty discriminatory, no matter how you slice it and dice it. So keep that in mind. And I don't know, I just think my encouragement for the youth, right, that's currently struggling with hope, right, with all this negativity, with everyone sharing their negative experiences, is that you can have a good life, and it could be cool. It could be decent. It could be better than what it is, and whichever path you take, there's going to be difficulties. So I'll just say that too. I don't want to romanticize anything. You take that route, you're going to maybe have people you don't like that you're dealing with. You take the other route, you're going to be stuck with people who can't meet you where you are intellectually, and you never really grow, and you never really go anywhere, and you never really, you feel like, again, that sense of allegiance to something that doesn't even resonate with you. Right. So, there's trade-offs, right? You can find, take a different path and take a possibility on better options, greater career advancements, and, be able to pay your rent and be able to live a pretty comfortable lifestyle, right? Or you can, find yourself in a different space and, maybe things aren't too bad, but you're not intellectually challenged. It's pretty mechanical, it's mechanical. And, there's not a lot of growth there, and, you might possibly be struggling, who knows, So I don't want to romanticize anything, Hardship is hardship. It's on both sides of the spectrum. Every path you take comes with its good and comes with the less favorable. But I just think conversations around anti-education is very dangerous, right? The thing of like homeschooling, well, so much of that is concerning for me as someone who values education. Is like you have a lot of people who are seeking homeschooling, but they don't value education. So, what exactly would you be teaching your kids? What exactly are these kids going to be learning? Are they going to be learning anything, right? Do you have the knowledge to be well versed in what it is that they should be learning, right? Do you have the time to really dedicate to homeschooling? For a lot of people, the answer is no. And so what you're going to have is a bunch of juveniles just kind of running rampant. I think we like to, we're so amazed at this generation of technology that we don't recognize that they're just kids, and so by not really giving them any guidance or any structure or even environments where they can develop a sense of professionalism, I don't really know what that's going to be like in the future, right? We can all go into, conspiracies, and we could, but I mean, at the end of the day, this is pretty concerning. And as someone who was working in education, the programs were there, right? I was working with high school students at a, public school, and they had programs for entrepreneurship, classes on financial literacy, but the district was not passing their levies, and the kids were not showing up. They weren't meeting their attendance, I don't know what you want to call it, like attendance requirements, so to speak. And so the programs were essentially going to be cut. And that was the reality. And it was interesting to me because at that time, this is kind of where the boom of like school doesn't matter, they don't teach you anything in school, was kind of popping up. And I was so concerned with that because here I am, I kind of came in the generation where they were getting rid of home economics, and I don't know. I just don't know how we can say these things when each and every one of us has graduated high school. And we're better for it, right? Even if it's a matter of just, like I said, being in environments where you learn professionalism. There are so many young people today that I see who don't even know not to wear pajamas in public spaces. And I know you guys are like, well, whatever, you know what I mean? It's not even a matter of being conservative. It's just a matter of like, people treat you how you show up in the world. So here we are with all of this amazement for this younger generation that is so seemingly rebellious yet innovative at the same time. And we're so amazed and we're seeing all these praises, but we're doing these kids a disservice because guess what? The real world hasn't changed, right? It's not like this new generation is born and all the other generations have died. That's not at all what happened, right? And so you talk about assimilation, they can't assimilate and they don't have the tools and the resources. So when you say, I think to think that the entire world essentially is going to accommodate a younger generation, I think that that is lazy thinking, and I think that is incredibly dangerous thinking, because the reality is that no, that generation is just going to flounder. Okay, this is where I always talk about science as well. Talk about natural selection. Okay, like that's what's going to happen. And I don't have to go off on a deep end because, quite frankly, I don't know, right? But I just think to think, that it's going to, the world is just going to simply bend. Sure, it may bend in a technological sense, but, in product based. But I think in terms of like, them being able to survive, I don't really think it's going to change much. It's a shame that we live in a world where it's so normal for, people to be in healthcare and like, not showing up to work presentable. You're expected to be here and you're working with people and you have to touch people and you have to, hygienics, So I hope I'm making sense. I hope the audio on this was not too bad. These are just my concerns about education. This was pretty brief. Honestly, I could go on and hit on so many different things, but I think I kind of got to at least the crux of it. And I kind of spoke about like why this is so dangerous, especially for African Americans, and why I think it's time for so many of us to kind of transition. I think more of us need to transition in the space of academia and intellectualism versus trade school and menial labor. It's time to transition. Okay. Conversations around money at this point, I just think, hey, I'm not a financial consultant, but I just think we're at a point in time where you have to be willing to make some kind of investment in yourself, period. And for all the people who talk about trade schools, I don't think they know enough people who actually have trades, honestly, and who have done that and it's worked out successfully. And it's not to say that it's not going to work out successfully, but I'm saying I don't think that there are enough people who have trades who are, you know what I mean? I just don't think that's a thing. And, we always have to take into consideration, of course, depending on where you live, things make a difference. So I don't know. I don't know. I know life is not about being the same. I'm not here to give like that type of advice per se, but I just think that this narrative is long-winded. It's ran its course. And I just think it's time to kind of start debunking these things. We have to start instilling hope in our younger generations, and we have to start, and it's not even instilling hope because it's not even a matter of a false sense. It's like we just have to start speaking positively about the possibilities, because right now kids are quite literally only left with exceptionalism. And that is exactly why we have, all this craziness going on, because, hey, if I can't be, an NFL player, if I can't be the top YouTuber, if I can't be, then what am I going to do in my life? Right. Those are quite literally the two new paths. And for everyone who's like, well, life is changing. No, it's not. We're always going to need cops. Okay. We're always going to need doctors. We can engage in conversations about the robots for giggles. Okay. But let's be focused. We're always going to need teachers. Let's be focused. So let's seriously be focused, and I just think instead of being so engaged with conspiracies, I just think the conversation should be like, how can we make our communities better with the resources that we have, the jobs that we have, and the people that are in position, instead of being like, hey, here's what we need to do. We need to no, it starts on an individual level. And if you have a bunch of people sitting at home online, consuming all of this really intellectually harmful content, it's not only just harmful, but it's incredibly misleading. You're never going to have a healthy community. And that's my entire premise. It's like, in order to have a healthy community, not only do you need healthy individuals, but you need educated individuals who can make educated choices, right? I was just talking about this on TikTok very briefly here. I'm currently reading John Head, Depression in Black Men, and just talking about how this is, this book is pretty old, but it's a real thing. And as I was reading this book, I realized that Black men were some of the most unhealthy persons in America. And not only is this understudied, right? We have to understand when we start looking at Black men and Black women, Black people, this is again back to my whole premise. We need Black scholars, right? We need people who can study our culture because, again, Western psychology is not for us. Hello. That's a conversation for another day. But we're not in the books, right? We're not in the books. And so we are the ones who have the solution. And if everybody is just working menial jobs and doing menial labor, that's no better than slavery. And I'm not going to act in that to slavery. I think being a plumber, trade school, whatever, those are very respectable careers and positions, and people make decisions based on all different kinds of choices. But if we're going to really talk about a revolution, it's not a matter of like, it's not enough to go in the streets and march, right? You have to be in position. I look at Jasmine Crockett, for example, like it's so much more than that. So much more than that, you know, and it's time that we kind of get to this place where we stop allowing there to only be one leader, right? Like there's only one Jasmine Crockett. There's only one Kamala Harris. Like there's no, you know what I mean? Like everyone can be a leader, you know, and maybe not like in the literal sense, but like every individual can contribute, essentially, is what I'm saying. It can hold a position of influence, you know, that can really change the world. And I think that's the message we need to get back to kids. And that's where it starts. And so I hope that this was great. I really enjoyed this. I feel like I'm wrapping up now, and I've completely concluded my thoughts. And I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you guys have a great day. Peace.